Hello, 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 folks, and thank you so much for joining me for these reflections on the winter solstice and hopefully on many of the blessings in as little as possible of the bleak of the midwinter. Hello, my name is Dr. Alexander Cummins. I'm delighted to be here offering this digital, albeit a pre-recorded little hearth fire for us to gather around as the season gets cold and dark and we start to think about ways in which we can honor the light so that it may return. You are welcome to message me about receiving these slides if you'd like. There are a couple poems on there, just many of the classics that we're going over, and some nice woodcuts and stuff, I think, on some occasion. So you are welcome to email me at that address there, or to check out my other services on my website and things like that. Thank you so much to Elizabeth of the Witch House and so many other projects for having me. It's a delight to do these celebrations of the seasonal change and astronomical events of the year and their folklore, some of their customs. I'm going to be concentrating tonight on midwinter in Old England and thinking about reflections in New England as well. But hopefully these are useful for you wherever you happen to be, at least in the hemisphere where it's winter at the moment. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the blessings that we're going to go over today on this evening. It's important that we think about solstice for what it is. It is the winter solstice is the longest night of the year, the shortest day of the year, if you want to frame it like that. And so we're going to open up with some of the bigger philosophical reflections. I don't plan on us getting too heady and weighty and considering, you know, what does it mean for the world to be dying and reborn, but I'd like us to at least ask those questions and to start off in a reflective mode, which is something that, you know, cowering from the chill of the elements inside gives us opportunity to do. That said, I do want to concentrate on some of the particularities. I don't want to say the small things, but the everyday things, and indeed the tangible things of the season and its solstice. And so we're going to be talking about some flora and fauna. We're going to be talking about holly and the humble robin, the redbreast. We're then going to talk a little bit about a feast day that is actually celebrated in our calendar now, last week on the 13th, but we'll talk about why the light of Lucy sheds so much across the whole of Christmastide, and indeed start considering ways in which Christian traditions merge, adapt, overtake, steal various pre-Christian practices as well, just a little bit. We're going to talk about mulling and mulling things over, not just for the philosophy of the season, but indeed in making our drinks a little spicier, a little more warming, a little more glowing. We'll talk about what we do with those drinks, which at least across Europe and into many of the traditions that have gone transatlantic, going and caroling as well as drinking, because what could be better than drink and song combined at last? So we'll talk about wassailing. We'll talk a little bit about the coming of the Magi and the gifts of the three wise men who are incorporated into many of these winter solstice foreshadowings of the things to come in the year. We'll talk about the ghosts in the longest nights as well, for this is indeed a season, just as Samhain and Halloween is very much a season of the dead and the spirits that wander in the night and that go bump in it sometimes. So too is this whole tide, also regarded as a time when the wild hunt is about. And we'll talk just a little bit about that. We'll consider some angles of druidry, both you know, sort of contemporary, and some reflections on earlier ideas about what may have been done in the reflection of the festival referred to as Alban Arthur, the light of winter, as well as having various other more poetic interpretations. And we'll end just talking about a couple of really simple midwinter folk charms as well. So that's our plan for this evening. And so I wanted to start by getting our big questions, you know, focused so that we can be looking for philosophical underpinnings in the kind of everyday and the tangible and the practical of what plants we bring in, what animals we look out for, and so on and so forth. So the solstice, again, I'm not going to show any diagrams of, you know, where the earth tilts and why this is a solstice and why it's important, 23-degree axis and so on and so forth. So much as just to say that the solstice needs to be understood as an astronomical event. When we look up into the sky, we have, even though the stars themselves have moved, we look at a more similar picture. We look at a picture that is more similar to that which our ancestors would have seen. This is the underlying principle of archaeoastronomy. Then if we look at the landscape, very often humans are always changing their landscape, but we aren't. I mean, we've started to with our satellites and so on, but we haven't so much messed with so many of the ways in which messed with is a very pejorative term there. We haven't augmented so much. We are closer in. We stand close to our ancestors in looking up at the sky than we do down at the land that we've paved over and rewilded and so on and so forth. So it's important to bear in mind that because it's an astronomical event, it's observable, right? It's a thing that's been looked at for a very long time and has a lot of different takes to it. So one of those big takes ends up being a take on, you know, the dying sun and the rebirthing sun. This is a time when the solstice, the sun appears to stand still for this period. And then as we've seen, it's been dying. The light has been getting shorter throughout the days of the approaching time for the shortest day. So we have this notion that the sun is dying, but also that as the days now get longer again after the solstice, again, this balance point where things have reached their nadir and now can start to climb up again. The sun itself can be reborn again. And so this idea of, you know, dying to be reborn is a version of this reversal motif that we see a lot of, this turning inward as well, of the dying going down, going away, going inside, and then coming back out again. The returning to ourselves, we might say. And this takes the form, you know, not just in, you know, driving home for Christmas and whatnot, but in a circling of the wagons in various ways. We see a reliance again on close kinship, on yes, family, but also on villages gathering together. And there are two sides to this. One is the spooky, long, dark of it all, which is that you know, character can be said to be who we are in the dark and in these dark times, both of the year and of our, you know, existences and so on, whether we take that in a political context or a soteriological religious one. That we are hopefully moving towards understanding who we are in the dark, which is a central question of the solstice, I would argue. This also isn't just about what happens when we're unseen, what happens when we feel alone, what happens you know, when things can't be traced to us, all those kinds of ring of Gyges questions, but of what we do when the chips are down, we might say as well, what we do when we can't see a way out. Again, the reflection I come back to a lot, what to do when we don't know what to do. This also reflects on not just a paucity of options or clarity, but of literally like you know, of poverty, right? That there are lean times in winter, historically speaking, and so a lot of solstice stuff seems to be about what to do when you don't have a lot, right? And finally, therefore, with this, not just with the dying and the rebirthing, but also with the idea that the winter is not just a dying off of everything, but it's a white slate of snow that frosts everything away, and that it does allow us, to a certain degree, a crisp, fresh start. And obviously, we see that more in terms of like New Year's celebrations, but we should bear in mind that there's some evidence for, again, archaeoastronomy and various other analyses of the ritual years of pre-Christian and prehistoric people, that we may be thinking about the winter solstice itself as the end of the year or the beginning of a new year as well. And so we need to be thinking about, we need to be sensitive to various calendricals that we can be tapping into, if of want of a better term, these currents throughout the meaning of ritual time across the year, the ritual year. So again, a little heady, little philosophical to start us off, but hopefully now we can kind of dive into some more concrete and tangible things. And I can't think of a more concrete or tangible motif of both midwinter itself and also of its kind of Jesus come lately cousin, Christmas itself, of holly, right? At least one herbalist I was reading or historian I should say, was saying that it seems the linking of holly to the season is obviously because it's around, because it's, you know, evergreen, but also because it's very easy to draw. And so, you know, every Christmas card, every you know, cheap bit of like office decoration or something in a window display can be done very easily with this very recognizable motif of the season. So holly, again, to read from the book of Wikipedia, is a, you know, we need to understand it is a genus of over 560 species of flowering plants in the family of Aquifoliaceae, and the only living genus in that family. Yep, you know, it's woody dioecious angiosperm genus, you know, as you do. The thing I want to point out is that it already has a bunch of different names to it, some spooky ones like bat's wings, but also it's holly because it's holy as well, the holy tree. It's sometimes called Christ's thorn, and that's because it's sometimes said that the crown of thorns, or the crown of things that had thorns in them, or was thorny, was made of holly. It's also just called the Christmas holly, and even, as we'll see in a second, simply just Christmas. Culpeper also refers to Holverbush and Holm too, and the Holm oak is the original Roman tree that Ilex comes from. Ilex, the genus name comes from, but now refers to this holly. Margaret Grieve tells us that Pliny says that the holly, if planted near a house or farm, repels poison and defends from lightning and witchcraft, and that the flowers cause water to freeze, and that the wood, if thrown at any animal, even without touching it, had the property of compelling the animal to return and lie down by it. So there's some good lore that seems to crop up again and again. It's protective, it's spiky, it's specifically a little saturnal more than it is martial. Culpeper literally calls it saturnine, I believe. And thus it can guard against all the evils old Saturn does, which include the ruling of witchcraft, and witchcraft in the sense being malevolent magic that is done against you. Also repels lightning. It's sometimes said that the spikiness of it gives it connections to lightning and even lightning deities, things of that nature. From its Christian folklore, it's said to have sprung up in Christ's footsteps sometimes, which is another reason it's said to be a holy tree. And also, as I say, said to be his crown of thorns. In the course of doing this research, I also learned that white chess pieces are commonly made of hollywood, or used to be at least, which I don't have any great significance for. I just found it interesting. Although reflecting on it, I like the idea that white is the color that moves first in chess, and so I like the idea of using holly as like a preemptive defense. And we'll see that there's ways in which that can be employed. I think it's sometimes said in Nordic myth, in the sagas, that the dart that injures Balder, the one plant that didn't make a deal with his mother to not hurt him, is sometimes said to be mistletoe, but it's also sometimes said to be holly. So again, we see those two plants of the season kind of merging sometimes hagiographically. So holly in the home specifically, then we get Culpeper reiterating what Pliny saith, which is that the branches of the tree specifically defend houses from lightning and men from witchcraft. So the idea of bringing little branches in or little twigs in. And this is reiterated again and again, not just by Jan Wies Fales here, but by many others. This seems pretty consistent in the folklore that holly was not a good thing to cut down. It was bad luck to fell a holly in any way, even if you were clearing out hedges. They were very often left because it was considered bad luck. But cutting the boughs of them, so cutting it completely down, was very bad luck, and many there are many accounts of farmers refusing to do so even to this day. But the boughs of it can be cut down at certain times of the year, and even then, as we'll see, there are strictures on when they should and shouldn't be in the house by certain different traditions and ways of doing things. So having boughs to hang about the house in the winter months was believed to provide shelter for sylvan spirits, and these grateful kind of fair folk would in turn bestow good luck upon the house's inhabitants. And so we have the idea of them coming in before it gets too cold, like rescuing something of the wild and letting it have some warmth in your home. We also then get differentiations between kinds of holly based off what they they look like, rather than, more complicated, counting of stamen or some of the complicated taxonomy of detailed botany. Legend holds that if the holly has smooth leaves, which is often called a she-holly and said to be female, if they were used to decorate, the woman of the house would rule and be in control for the year. And if men decorated with the prickly-leaved hollies, the he-holly, then the man would rule the house, and harmony would ensue from a balanced display containing both smooth and prickly leaves. And we see this motif repeated, and we also see that there's a particular charm we'll get to later for a she-holly. It's also said of this this kind of war / peaceful accord of the sexes in the home, that if a man carried a bag of holly leaves and berries, he would have a better chance of attracting a woman, and an unmarried woman who placed a holly leaf under her pillow would dream dreams filled with images of a future husband. A gift of holly to newlyweds bestowed a blessing for a happy and fruitful marriage. And we'll come back to that stuff a little later so we can see some of the details behind it and how this stuff could incorporate a vast variety of spirit works and dream incubation operations. So I said holly can be called a plant called Christmas. Roy Vickery, in his book on the plant law, says that throughout the British Isles, the holly is the plant most frequently associated with Christmas. And indeed, in parts of England, holly was simply known as Christmas. He talks to one correspondent in Gwent in 93, who said that he was nearly 70 years of age and was born and bred in Norfolk. And holly was never called by name by my grandfather. It was always called Christmas. Go and get some Christmas and bring it inside. And I love this concept, right? That it's so tied to it that it becomes the thing itself. So we know we can talk about, the kind of wider history of this, that the Romans decorated with holly. And it was also sent as wreaths, as gifts, or with other gifts to friends during Saturnalia specifically, which again, we're not really going to get into tonight because it's kind of its own thing. But again, this kind of mixture of a day of abandon and social reversal of masters serving servants and things like that. But we get this link again. It's here, it's doing a thing, it's tied with decoration, it's tied with gift giving to a certain degree. And it's something of bringing the wild inside, or acknowledging the wild this one night, so that the order for the rest of the year can proceed. There's also a Cornish tradition of using a holly bush instead of a pine tree for Christmas decoration, and this gets called a holly bush, whether or not it is actually like a full bush thing, like this, or two hoops that have been tied with holly as well. And it's also sometimes called a bush, and it's more of a kind of stylized decoration. Most folklore states, as I said, that holly shouldn't be fully cut down. It also says that the decorations, once they've come down, and there are, again, regionally a lot of different opinions on exactly when that should be, but most people say that there is a particular date that you should know. That the decoration shouldn't be burned, especially not in the house, that was very, very bad luck. And these bad lucks include things like that it shouldn't be in the house at all before Christmas Eve, and then only on Christmas Eve, because it is Christmas, and to bring Christmas in before it's Christmas is not necessarily a good thing, I guess. When every day is like Christmas, it's like no day is Christmas. I guess we could say cynically. And again, these bad lucks manifest often as misfortune, little accidents in the home, illness as well. And so these are it's often said that bringing it in too early is what's caused someone to be ill when they get ill. And so it can also be, in that sense, a strategy for helping deal with illness, that you can look around and see if there's a bunch of holly and take that out. So you got options. So to look at something of a classic, I suppose, of the season, we get again, I'm not going to try and do an English lit thing here and analyze like what this means so much as just give us a chance to read it and a chance to kind of absorb it and to think about how it might be apt for us, regardless of our religious practices, beliefs, customs, and home cultus. if we want to put it like that, that there's a chance to reflect on some key motifs here. Again, I use that word a lot today. The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. The rising of the sun and the running of the deer, the playing of the merry organ, sweet singing in the choir. The holly bears a blossom as white as the lily flower, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ to be our Saviour. The holly bears a berry as red as any blood, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ for to do us sinners good. The holly bears a prickle as sharp as any thorn, and Mary bore sweet Jesus Christ on Christmas Day in the morn. The holly bears a bark as bitter as any gall, and Mary bore sweet Jesus for to redeem us all. The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. And we'll return to some, should we say, extra-Christian, non-Christian, pre-Christian, post-Christian ideas about the holly and kingship and the dying and reborn son and child and king, so on. When we talk about some druidry nearer the end. So just a note on toxicology before we move on from flora to fauna. Terry Breverton points out in his Complete Herbal, holly berries are moderately poisonous to humans, to the point where you'd still probably get your stomach pumped, especially kids. But they are an extremely important food item for numerous species of birds. In the autumn and early winter, the berries are hard and unpalatable, but after being frozen or frosted several times, they soften and become milder in taste. Holly hedges and trees also provide secure shelter for birds. So I wanted A, to reflect on this, like, by the way, just in case you weren't aware, holly berries are poisonous. Don't think you're doing some, wonderful winter solstice thing by giving yourself, food poisoning and having to get your stomach pumped by feeding someone holly berries. Don't do that unless you really don't like them, in which case, I guess, do it knowing what you're doing, if you're going to do it. But also I wanted to use this as an opportunity to just kind of like look for the philosophical reflections in the practical, rather than thinking about those as two separate endeavors of the mysticism that denies the world, and thinking about how, we ourselves, or at least I myself, also feel that in autumn and early winter, I become a little more hard and a little more unpalatable, but that after being frozen or frosted several times, I too, as the year starts to thaw out, I often soften and become milder in taste. And so I wanted to remind ourselves that the cold can make us feel hard and frozen and a little bitter in this time of year, and that's a very natural thing. But so hopefully, just as the holly teaches us protection and things, so too its berries can remain nutritious for those things that can digest them, and remain a protection against those that can't, I guess, as well. So yeah, may we all be only as hard as we want to be, and as mild to taste as we'd like. So speaking of birds, the bird of the season, just as we talked about the plant of the season, I would argue, again from an Old English perspective, it's very much the robin redbreast, Erytharchus rubicula. So we find robins, and even this robin specifically found them throughout Europe, Morocco, Algeria, the Canary Islands, Madeira, even further afield than that. We also find them we find a thing called the robin in America, and as one ornithologist put it, English settlers in America, in their nostalgia for the old country, simply renamed the local red-breasted thrush, which is unfortunately titled, its Latin name is Turdus migratorius, which is the American robin, after their favorite bird from home. And as you see, the American robin is really quite different. It is, that ruddy orange, but it's far darker and has a different profile. So just of interest, I learned there were a bunch of different collective nouns for a group of robins. They can be a blush of robins, a bobbin of robins, which is fun to say, obviously, a breast of robins, a carol of robins, a gift of robins, a reliant of robins, a riot of robins, which is fun, a rouge of robins, a round of robins, and a ruby of robins as well. So feel free to pepper those if you see more than 3 of them around. It is literally originally called the ruddock or the redbreast, which is again what that means. And just in case you are like, we talk about them being red a lot, and that's like the cartoon version of a robin is red, but they're actually kind of orange, right? And yeah, it's ruddy is really more accurate. And as we'll see, burnt is very important as well in many of the myths. The robin was originally called the redbreast, but as people began to add proper names to the names of animals and birds, they became robin redbreast, or later simply shortened to robin or robins. Much in the same way with the Jenny Wren and even the jackdaw, right? That's a proper name attached to that bird called a daw, right? It's the jackdaw. They're all called Jack. And that comes from Mick Hartley's fabled folklore of the robin redbreast. So let's talk a little bit more about this ruddiness, this red of breasts. It's such a cutie. Look at it. In some legends, it was an all-brown bird until it was touched with the blood of Christ as he hung on the cross, which is the classic legend of everything happens when Christ's blood touches it on the cross. In some versions, the bird was singing in his ear to alleviate the agony of his final moments. In other versions, it attempted to pluck out the nails or the thorns from the crown. And in another version, the robin was trying to staunch the wound in Christ's side made by the legionary's lance. That's the legionary Longinus, however you're meant to say that. Another legend says that the robin scorched its breasts in the fires of purgatory, mercifully taking drops of water in its beak for the lips of the parched souls who find themselves there in torment. And in Wales, this act has earned the bird its name of breast burned. So a variation of this is that the wren is said to have been our kind of Promethean bird and stole fire from heaven and returned to earth aflame. And so the other birds all contribute a feather each to replace those burnt away. But the robin is anxious and comes too close to the poor wren, and thus is also caught on fire and remains and the burns remain on this plumage there as well. So a bunch of really interesting ideas about what's going on there and how to interpret it, whether we're talking about just straight up, connections to, again, reflections on Christ's sacrifice, or on the idea that the robin is a helpful bird in many of these cases, right? They're trying to do good. They're trying to help someone out in pain. So the robin is the aid, is the friend of those in need. Robin specifically making these charitable gestures towards the souls in purgatory, the lost or the lonely souls, who, if not burning, are at least, lonely and awaiting people remembering them and awaiting, their case being seen in the divine court before the pearly gates, so to speak. And then also this idea of the link of the robin with the wren, which is found in an awful lot of other folklore of the British Isles, but also, again, trying to help and bearing the marks of helping. No good deed goes unpunished, we could say, if we were being cynical. So a lot to robins beyond just their Christmasness, but it's Christmasnesses that we come back to again, partly because they are messengers. They are the Midwinter Messenger. So robins are tied up literally with the postal service, in that the first official British postman uniform of 1840 was red, and soon after they're referred to as robins, after the bird, and so this leads to robins being put on Christmas cards. And again, it's fascinating to study how Christmas card culture emerges, and that in the early days, when it wasn't really clear what the grammar of it was, what the style of the meme was, that people would just whack whatever on, because we're not really sure what goes on Christmas cards, because Christmas cards are a new thing. And so we find often the very red-breasted robin as a robin. So this is our start of our connection with the messengerness, along with also offering trying to offer too many feathers, or trying to be too helpful, to the wren in need, or to Christ in need, or to the lonely souls in need. This idea of their messengerness, their carrying of messages, or their delivering of messages, it might be thought of, again, very practically speaking, that they're one of the only Irish birds that sings all through winter. So they're one of the few ones that are delivering messages still, we might say. So they work all year, and especially work through winter. They also have a habit of visiting human houses for gifts as well, almost like asking for their yearly tip, we might say. This is particularly noted in England and Ireland of English and Irish robins. It doesn't seem to be so noted in other parts of Europe or elsewhere where robins are found, where they are generally specifically said in local custom to be kind of shy and kind of avoiding people. Robins are said to be a lot more gregarious, we might say, or a lot more tame, we might say, or a lot more trusting of in England and Ireland. It seems that many of these old customs seem to be remembered by them too, we might say. The final way that they're like a messenger is that there's a lot of stuff, again, like the holly, about not harming robins. We shouldn't shoot the messenger, we might say. There's particularly law that if a robin dies in your hands, that it will leave you with a shake that may never leave, which isn't necessarily about dying by your hand. Like, you know, if you kill it, it'll be angry and curse you, so much as something of robins dying produces harm in what's holding them. So bear that in mind. So we come to discussing the Light of Lucy. So let's start from the specifics. St. Lucy's Day, the Feast of St. Lucy, is a Christian feast day observed on the 13th of December. The observation commemorates Lucia of Syracuse, an early 4th century virgin martyr under the Diocletian persecution, who seems to have been particularly bloody-minded in pursuing martyrs to make martyrs, who, according to legend, brought food and aid to Christians hiding in the Roman catacombs, wearing a candle-lit wreath on her head to light her way and leave her hands free to carry as much food as possible. So here we have the reenactment of this in this procession, and there's an awful lot of processional stuff that happens on various Lucy's days. Lucy is huge in Scandinavia, especially in Sweden and Norway, as well as with Swedish like cultural and speaking peoples of the wider Scandi countries. Big in Italy, the Lucia cults are huge there, also in those diasporic communities in America, where it looks slightly different things are emphasized. There's a lot more of the wreath of candles in the Scandinavian observances, I would say. There's a lot more of the eyes. She's said to have had her eyes plucked out, or to have plucked out her own eyes by some accounts. And there's a lot more of her holding her own eyes in Italian stuff. One of the other Italian contexts for Lucia is that the port town of San Lucia was the last city, the last thing that many Italian immigrants would have seen. And so a particularly famous song, and also in common expression, was that the eyes of Lucy are the last you see as you leave home, potentially on a one-way journey, that you know had no expectation of ever making the money and time to go back, you know. So Lucy comes to represent the last look of the home you leave behind. So we have these contexts for in diaspora. We also have a variety of stuff around the shedding of this light in the darkness. Now, why are we talking about this for a class on the solstice, which is happening on the 21st? Well, so falling within the Advent season, St. Lucy's Day is viewed as a precursor of Christmastide, pointing to the arrival of the light of Christ in the calendar on Christmas Day. So we have this general idea that around this kind of tide, this solstice tide, this Christmas tide, that we get a lot of the motifs coming together, and they have their particular time and order, but also they're all kind of here in a kind of chorus in the background, we might say. And I find this no better expressed than the fact that these lovely folks here in these, they're not dunce's caps, they're the opposite, they're wizard caps, they're actual wizard hats, are star boys, are dressed up like the Magi, that they are in procession, and that so we have not just Lucy being a light that prefigures or pre-shadows or pre-lights the way of the Christ child on Christmas, but also the Magi themselves, who also saw by an important starlight and sought for a bigger light of the world, we might say. We're taking that Christian angle on them. And so they're also here, right? And they're not celebrated till, as we'll talk about in a second, January 6th. Traditionally, that's their main feast. So we have all of these feasts of the winter time, all kind of like all the emissaries and their motifs kind of coming together, and also all getting their little moment in the procession as we move through to everyone's particular place. The other reason that this is even more important to talk about at the solstice is that Lucy is a solstice saint. Her feast day, which coincided with the shortest day of the year prior to calendar reforms, is widely celebrated as a festival of light. And so it seems that by a variety of, and the history of this is pretty complicated, it turns out, a bunch of different calendrical jiggery-pokery of working out when months were, how many days they had, and how things had to be recalculated from when, and so on, that it seems that Lucy's day was celebrated, if not on the shortest day, then as the shortest day, if we want to put it like that diplomatically. And this is present in English-speaking places, in Germanic regions, in Scandinavian regions, and in Iberian regions. So one of the things that's done, that's more fun, rather than going on a huge hagiographic reflection on what St. Lucy means in different parts of the world and so on. One of the things that's made Lucy's cats, these buns of St. Lucy, are these saffron buns. They're especially popular in Sweden and Norway and their diaspora, although they find their way into all sorts of things at this point. It's thought that they were originally modeled after a sleeping cat. It's sometimes said, this is in scare quotes because I found it online, but I couldn't find a reliable citation for it, but also it was a reflection of like what people say about it. So sometimes they're this classic S shape, sometimes they're this fourfold shape, and sometimes they're this kind of twofold shape. Sometimes they seem to be more of a solar cross, sometimes they seem to be more of a kind of spiral, sometimes they seem to be more of the eyes. They literally like made up like Lucy's eyes. So they're sometimes said to be modeled after a sleeping cat, which was associated with the devil, because they're made of saffron, the spice believed to have magical properties, and has a bright sunny color, which shouldn't be itself undervalued as a magical property, by the way. The treats were thought to be actually effective way to ward against Satan. The buns were originally called devil cats, but later the name was changed to a more polite Lucia cats. Now there's also some complication here, and we see this even in this very concrete food way, and there are many different ways to make it. There are many different recipes, having asked a couple friends who practice a bunch of different Swedish folk magics. The general consensus is that there's loads of different recipes and cakes, but that it should always have saffron. That's the thing that makes it like a Lucy cake and not something else. Even in this study of like how devilish is it, how holy is it, where does it come from, what's its tradition, where's it linked up to, we should also bear in mind that it's said that this period of time is referred to as Lusa or Lucy, which may refer to a pre-Christian time of restless spirits out in the world, restless ghosts, a kind of wild hunt scenario. Could even refer to potentially a particular entity of this time, the Lusa, the Lucy, who some reflect maybe some kind of pre-Christian goddess of some kind. So we, again, in the shadow of all of this stuff, we have a concrete thing that we do, and then a bunch of lights that cast a bunch of different shadows of where it could have come from, right? And again, each year we get to reflect on these things. So it's present again in English law. So it seems that it's been backdated to the 13th when it would have been the 21st. Like that, it would have been the day of this time, that we number as the 21st, would have been the shortest day, because again, a nocturne upon St. Lucy's Day being the shortest day. So tis the year's midnight, and it is the day's Lucy's, who scarce 7 hours herself unmasks. The sun is spent, and now his flasks send forth light squibs, no constant rays. The world's whole sap is sunk, the general balm, the hydropic earth hath drunk. Whither, as to the bed's feet, life is shrunk. Dead and interred, yet all these seem to laugh, compared with me, who am their epitaph. Study me then, you who shall lovers be, at the next world, that is, at the next spring, for I am every dead thing in whom love wrought new alchemy, for his art did express a quintessence even from nothingness, from dull privations and lean emptiness, he ruined me, and I am rebegot of absence, darkness, death, things which are not. All others, from all things, draw all that's good, life, soul, form, spirit, whence they being have, I by love's limbeck am the grave of all that's nothing. Oft a flood have we too wept, and so drowned the whole world, us too. Oft did we grow to be two chaoses, when we did show care to aught else, and often absences withdrew our souls and made us carcasses. But I am by her death, which word wrongs her, of the first nothing the elixir grown. Were I a man, that I were one, I needs must know, I should prefer, if I were any beast, some ends, some means, yea, plants, yea, stones detest, and love, all some properties invest. If I an ordinary nothing were, a shadow, a light, and body must be here. But I am none, nor will my sun renew. You lovers, for whose sake the lesser sun to this time to the goat is run, to fetch new lusts and give it you. Enjoy your summer all, since she enjoys her long night's festival. Let me prepare towards her, and let me call this hour her vigil and her eve, since this, both the years and the day's deep midnight is. John Donne there with classic metaphysical come to bed, you beautiful future corpse stuff. All right, so what are one of the other things that we can do at this season? Well, we can mull for your life. So the ancient Greeks, we know, spiced wine for winter storage and feasts specifically. And the Romans made a variety of condita, spiced things, spiced wine, including condita paradoxum, surprise spiced wine, which used honey, pepper, mastic, laurel, saffron, date seeds, and dates soaked in wine, amongst other things. And by the Middle Ages, we should understand that mulling was understood like humorally to keep us warm through the cold. What do I mean by that? Well, it was understood medicinally. It was understood that with the thermodynamics of good health, that warm things, that hot things, that fiery things, things that had element association with, not just association with elemental fire, but had some instantiation of the virtue of elemental fire, was needed to keep us warm inside from the old. So the heat is very, very important. It's what keeps us alive. So as you know, as I reflect sometimes, when Descartes says that one of the main differences between a living body and a dead body is that a living body is warm, he's not just being creepy or facetious. He's saying that it is the warmth that makes us alive, right? We would say that something alive is warm. They would say something warm is alive, we might say. Let's not say that fire was regarded as being a sentient being necessarily, but that heat is not we rather regard heat as a byproduct of life, whereas they very much viewed it as a necessity of life. So heat is especially important in the thermodynamics of health. There is this ranking of like the fiery humans are argued to be superior and necessary, and of more proper benefit than the benefits of the other humors, other than maybe the sanguine humor in certain cases. We don't need to get deeply into humoral theory, except to say that it's understood that these spices were not just said to be pleasant or fun or unusual or even practical, although they are. Mulling is also partly about the spicing of things because we need to dry them, and they might start getting a little moldy, and we want them to still taste like good to us in some way. So we mask a lot of the taste of things that are going off a little bit. So there is that element. Also, spicing ensures that they're fermented and so don't go off. Those kinds of concepts as well are present. But also this idea is that like these spices are warming and that they are good tonics for the blood, that they keep things flowing well, that there's a nice fire inside us that keeps like digestion going good, which is considered a sort of furnace. And we also see this mulling in traditions like Germanic glöhwein and also Scandinavian glögg or glöggi, and other drinks like that. And again, a lot of these glow all come from the root of to glow or to make glowing or to feel glowy. So this idea again that mulling is about you mull the drink, the hot drink or the cold drink, whatever it is, for the glow of the hot drink in this case on a cold night, right? Or of the warming drink, I should say, on a cold night. And I like that idea that we're putting these spices in, often these very solary spices, let's be honest, like the use of oranges, even cinnamon and clove have certain like solary qualities to them, as well as being pretty Jupiterian very often. So if we're thinking about things that we drink for our good health, right, then it's worth us considering at least a little bit the origins of wassailing. All right. So first described by Peter de Langtoft, writing in the 1320s, it said that wassailing was the practice where the leader of a gathering took a large cup, and this is a very large cup. This is like kind of this kind of big. We might have some images of it, but it's like a punch bowl, like literally kind of a punch bowl of sorts, but like a big cup / bowl. And they would take this thing and they would cry wassail, Old English for your health. It's cheers, right? That person was answered drink ale. They drank from the wassail bowl or cup and passed it to the next to the company with a kiss. Then each repeated these actions, did the same again. And Ronald Hutton points out in Stations of the Sun, which is one of the few histories of the ritual year in the British Isles to be written, that from the 8th century to the 14th, and he quotes, you know, the famous poem Beowulf and the conduct book of Robert of Brunn, the word wassail appears to be a toast. It's just simply the Anglo-Saxon for be of good health. So wassailing as a thing doesn't really become a practice, it seems, until around the 14th century, actually, right? Where it seems to get formalized as a practice rather than just like a thing you say. And from this cheers to actual carols, we think we have a pretty good mixed case for kind of a turn in the 17th century. And this is partly the result of shifts in economics, in the economy, of more people being in vastly different circumstances, of a certain depression economically setting in, where it was necessary for some people to go out and not just share drink in the home, but also to try and sell, as at least one commentator, John Selden, complains, overpriced mulled wine and song to try and raise a bit of money over the solstice. So in 1602, Nicholas Breton writes of a hearty welcome filling the wassail bowl. All right, so we get this sense that like there's a wassail bowl and it's like it's hospitality thing, and you can, like, if you've put one out, then people are coming to you for it. So we have this concept of people going to other people for food and drink. So we expand that from family to like a wider community thing. By 1618, John Wither remarks of the wealthy who look to the poor and entertain their Christmas wassail bowls. So we have the idea that like maybe wealthier folks are paying for these, or are like or are entertaining them, are patronizing them, or are like allowing them to be brought to them and filling them, right? And then by 1631, John Taylor describes a company of maids calling a rural household at Christmas, crying, "Wassail, wassail, jolly wassail," and bringing cakes and a bowl of drink. And in return, they would be given white bread, cheese, and minced pies. So we get this shift occurring definitely in this kind of record. That's not to say that in certain parts people weren't taking it round the town, around different pubs earlier than that, but the practice of it becoming more like caroling, more like going and singing, and also about the gathering and the sharing of drink around it. Wassailing we also have for apple trees specifically, for orchard trees and fruit bearing trees of any sort really, but primarily apples. And that's a slightly different thing, because that kind of wassailing is partly honoring the tree and sharing and allowing the tree to share in community, as well as also threatening the tree. If it doesn't bear apples, you're going to do horrible things to it. That one has a slightly different flavor to these like winter solstice ones, but apples are still a big part of many of the wassail bowls, whole roasted apples put in them. So we have a Nottinghamshire wassail carol here, which speaks of the jolly wassail bowl, the wassail of good ale, welfare the butler's soul that settles this to sail, oh jolly wassail. Good dame, here at your door our wassail we begin, we are all maidens poor, we pray now let us in with our wassail. Our wassail we do fill with apples and with spice, then grant us your goodwill to taste here once or twice of our good wassail. And Professor Hutton notes that there are actually 12 verses to this. He only quotes 3 in Stations, but also that, which again 12 mirroring the days of Christmas, and 12th night being especially important, also Epiphany and Magi Day, but that sometimes also only the second verse was sung, interestingly, right? The one that identifies us as maidens, and Hutton makes a point that wassailing is not an exclusively female thing, but is traditionally a thing particularly associated with women. It's a thing that maids would go and do. You also notes again these bowls, and again these massive bowls, right, that look like huge goblets, were decorated with evergreens and ribbons and contained spiced ale, roast apples, and toast seasoned with nutmeg and sugar. And it's likely that this was done elsewhere as well as Nottinghamshire. So I mentioned that the coming of the Magi are kind of like creeping in a little bit. Some solstice celebrations come to include the 3 wise men, the 3 kings, or the 3 Magi. Their main feast, as I said, is the 6th of January, although they do have a feast on the 1st of January and the 11th or 12th as well. This is also complicating the whole, like, solstice is Christ's birth, but also Christmas is Christ's birth, but also the 6th is the old birth of Christ. Again, the calendar moving backward and forward by different reforms and different feasts, staying there as the rest of the thing gets put back, while other ones get put back twice because they've been put back and then again, and then adjusted for, overly adjusted for, etc. But it's the pre-reform calendar's old Christmas as well, and indeed the Christmas that's often celebrated in certain communities of the Orthodox churches. This further complexifies the whole solstice and birth of Christmas and birth of Christ. How do they turn up? Well, we do get gold, frankincense, and myrrh starting to come in. People starting to use it for general wintry stuff, for general solstice stuff. The incense is just as incense is. Incense is also arguably never just incense. It's also like air conditioning and cleansing and uplifting and sanctifying and even antitoxic and antibacterial and things. But the gifts are understood both as physical objects, as emblems of things, and also as blessings. The idea again of bringing blessings. So the 3 kings also have a series of guising, caroling, and mumming traditions across Europe, especially persistent in Protestant Britain and Germanic regions. And we'll talk about those because those are who we saw the Star Boys processing with our girl Lucy. We also see them here. So Star Boys and Star Singers, we get across Europe dressing up as the Magi and processing before a star on a long pole very frequently. It is not just adorable, it is very historical. A synod in Germany at Christmas in 1417, the British clergies performed the Starboy drama. The Starboy drama is like a whole mumming play, or a whole kind of style of mumming play, a bit like a mystery play. It's a version of the Three Kings story that also includes Judas and a sword fight, and sometimes even a doctor who revives the dead, as well as Jesus. After the Reformation in the 16th century, pupils of the cathedral schools in Protestant nations conducted these processions to raise funds to replace the church support that had disappeared. So we have in partly that the Reformation, the idea is sometimes that, oh well, the Protestants weren't allowed saints, but they could still have the Magi, because the Magi weren't always regarded as technically saints. They also are regarded as saints from at least the 14th century in certain hagiographies. But that's one account, which is very theological. But there's also a more, again, economic, ecclesiastic reform one, which is that there's less support for the churches now, so they have to find a way to do something popular that people give money for. So let's put some kids in some paper crowns. Dedicated carols for star singing and for the Star Boys dramas exist in Central Europe and Scandinavia. Some of the versions of it even go house to house. And there, especially in like Cologne and things, in Cologne, where the bones of the three Magi, where the relics of the three Magi are held at the Kölner Dom, at the cathedral in Cologne, they're closely tied to marking the door with the initials of the Magi, which is one of the other big traditions on Epiphany. And at least when I've been there in Cologne before now, they'll have kids going around doing caroling, asking for money, and giving out stickers with that year's formula for like the year and the initials of the Magi, and people will put those on their doors. But in earlier times, they sold chalk, I think, as well. This is a little different from British Star Boys mumming traditions, which tend to emphasize doing it around pubs, and it's like an entertainment mumming mystery play thing more than it's a wassailing, going door to door asking for money, because it does get tied into asking for money, asking for food and drink and things like that as well, which we also find not just with star singing, which is again kids. We also see a variety of begging traditions and guising traditions across Europe, where dressing up as the Magi, you were allowed to ask for tithes that you would then go and give to Jesus as well. So it's this strange, like, as the Magi gave gifts, so you give gifts to them to give, that kind of thing. There's one more way that the Magi are kind of important for now, and we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that at the end of this slide, I should say. But it's worth bearing in mind, and again, not to play spooky, spooky, worry, but it is worth bearing in mind that the dark of the year is often considered a dangerous time to go outside, dangerous time to go wandering, dangerous time to let the fire die out. And it's dangerous because it's said to be a time of marauding spirits, that sometimes it's said literally from Lucy's Nacht, from Lucy's night to Epiphany is a crazy time, right? And so again, we have this idea of like Christmas and the birth of the light in the dark. There's a bunch of dark around, right, that the light is born right into, and that we have to defend from and against, I guess. Again, it's often roaming, rampaging, which is to say it's coming from somewhere else and it's going somewhere else. So it's not like, oh, everywhere is deeply haunted, but it is that you may be part of some kind of like poltergeist drive-by, rather than like everyone is, rather than all the ghosts are turned up to 11. So it's again this concept of like the dark outside isn't necessarily itself bad, but it may contain things in it that are passing through that might be real bad. So that's worth bearing in mind. So what's to be done about all this? Well, historically speaking and traditionally speaking, you stay inside. That's what you do. That's the complicated, arcane explanation and observation and observance of the season, right? You stay inside. You refresh your magical wards if you have them. Your thing, you know, your horseshoe or whatever else. Your bit of rowan or your bit of holly. You stock up on your food, both in terms of like the larder and making sure you have enough, but also in terms of like making sure everything's been spiced and suitably prepared. You have good smells in the place. You stud your pomander with your clothes and things, and you hang that as a protective thing for the heirs. You eat well and you eat warmly. Again, you keep the inner fire burning as well, and you tell ghost stories about why you're not going outside right now. This seems to be a very, very traditional thing, and we see this especially played out in why A Christmas Carol is called A Christmas Carol, right? Because those ghosts visiting are doing so at the time of year that we are visited by ghosts most regularly. It also reflects, to take a little Dickens tangent here, it also reflects a very traditional Anglo-Germanic take on ghost hauntings, which are that ghosts are trying to scare us straight in some way very often. That most ghosts are not miscreant, tortured mistakes of God, right? That they're not just like, oh, they're tortured by the devil, or they're like by their own like inaction or sin, and now are like these sad things. That a ghost that you meet that's like haunting you or haunting a place and making life difficult for the living is not just doing it because it's trapped or because it's mad or because it's an agent, witting or unwitting, of the devil, but because it may be working for God in trying to scare you back to the church. This is a very, very established idea in early modern Anglo-Germanic ghost lore, that a ghost will turn up and be like, I was murdered, and I will like visit terrible harm on you if you don't start going to church more regularly, right? And that they are doing that in order to pay off some of their debt to get out of purgatory sooner, is another way that it's often formed. And I find this fascinating, that again the scaring in the ghosts of Christmas that haunt Scrooge we're also trying to get him to do the right thing in some way. I find that really fascinating. And also they're doing it by getting him to reflect on his mortality ultimately, and not by saying you're going to burn forever in the lake of fire, but you will be forgotten and hated. Interestingly. Anyway, so why is this relevant to Magi stuff as well? Well, again, those gifts of incense are not just about making things smell nice or holy. They're also about using it to cleanse. And the Rauchnacht, the smoke nights of this period and into the new year, are also very much about cleansing after the solstice. Again, thinking about solstice not just as the still point, but as the point where it's been getting darkest and now it can get light again. Yeah, so smoke nights with the Magi and their incenses. So to take a druidic angle, just to add to our kind of summarize in the ways that we are exploring light and the darkness in various ways. I mean, take two instances here. Albin Arthur is widely just said to mean the light of winter, but it's sometimes a little more poetically translated, as by Emma Restel Orr here, who says Midwinter in the Druid tradition is called Albin Arthur, Welsh or Brythonic for the light of the bear. For some, it is understood to imply both the constellation of the Great Bear in our northern winter skies, and also Arthur, the saviour and mythic hero of the British Isles. Historically, a Christian Romano-British warrior king, Arthur fought the pagan Saxons, delaying their incursion into the Britannic Isles for 2 more generations. And so there is a certain Arthurian bent that we can take on this, and it's one, I think, as I've been reflecting on it this year, of rest. It's that Arthur rests under the earth somewhere, in Camelot or Avalon or wherever else, or on some other isle, or in some other fairy dimension, and he rests until Britain needs him again, where he will rise like our old school Captain America, a being from the past, suspended out of time, a man out of time to become the leader of his times, etc. And he will defend the Isle from whatever great harm is to come. So we get some like apocalypse-y kind of dimensions to this initially, right? That when the stars are right, Arthur, like dread Cthulhu, will rise again. And there's a couple of things I find interesting about this myth. One is that every year he doesn't means that however bad you think it was, it's not as bad as it's going to get. Which is, again, maybe a very cynical take on this, but like we aren't at the darkest timeline yet, because Arthur hasn't turned up again. And I rather like this idea. I find that his absence, therefore, is comforting. And his absence is not just comforting because I don't want him to turn up and do a final judgment-y thing in case I'm on the wrong side. It's also that he isn't just not here, he is canonically resting up. He is canonically sleeping. And that Arthur, the greatest and wisest of the kings of the Britons, if he's sleeping through this, then maybe we can find a way to sleep through some of it as well. Not in a avoid our problems way, but in a conserve our strength way and pick our battles way. That, for me, has been my Arthurian reflection on Albin Arthur this year. The Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids states that there is another tradition that says there is a perpetual battle, and here we're back to the oak and the holly, between the Oak King, the god of the waxing light, or the divine child, and the Holly King, the god of the waning light, or the Dark Lord. Each year at the Winter Solstice, the Oak King wins the battle and rules until he is defeated by the Holly King at the time of the Summer Solstice. And I also like this because, again, it means that like the sun standing still, the solstice, is not about the sun coming to a halt and being like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm old and doddering and I'm going to just not do anything. And then I guess I'll go down because it's already been going down and going down. That's the movement of it. And then it goes at the same point. And then it starts getting higher and higher again. So this is interesting to me because the idea of the sun stopping is not just itself standing still, but of the light and the darkness meeting each other and it being an active and dynamic still point, a stalemate or a back and forth, right? This idea of them fighting, them warring, them dancing, we might say, so that each wins for half the year. Again, something very ritually satisfying about that and presenting itself to many, many options for ways in which people can enact that. But again, a resurgence of holly, not just as a plant called Christmas, but also a king. So some midwinter folk charms. Again, one that we've already kind of touched on in a little more detail, and one just to remind you, very simple, the burning of the Yule log. So traditionally the Yule log is part of the last year's Yule tree. And I like this idea. Again, I'm not saying this is the only and definitive explanation, but the idea of burning it as an act of faith and renewal, that indeed the light and the warmth will return, right? You are enacting it by making it warm, but you're also saying like, I got nothing now. So I trust that you're going to come back and not leave me to starve, right? So it's a little bit of a like trustful gesture as well to a certain extent. In the north of England, holly was used for divination and dreams, as we've been talking about. In one ritual, leaves from a she-holly, the smooth ones, are placed under the pillow for prophetic dreams, or a young girl might place 3 pails of water in their bedroom and pin 3 holly leaves at her heart before going to sleep on the eve of Christmas, New Year's Day, Midsummer, or Halloween. And I like this one because it includes all of these festivals, as well as Winter Solstice, that like just at certain key corners of the year, that divination is ripe, right? The solstices and the equinoxes, as well as a few ones, right? She expected to be roused by 3 yells as if from the throats of 3 bears, succeeded by as many hoarse laughs. When these died away, the form of her future husband appeared and showed her future attachment to her by changing the position of the water pails. If he did not care for her, the water pails were found unchanged in the morning. So we have not just like a classic love divination, you'll dream of your sweetheart that you'll marry, but also an indication of how good the marriage will be or not, which I love, right? Oh, you'll marry, but it's going to be a horrible time. That's useful to know. Also that you're going to be roused by particular sounds. Not just you will dream of something, but you will know you're dreaming it. You will know this is something to pay attention to because of other things, which sound distinctly like spirits, frankly, right? The knocking of spirits, the shouting as if by the mouths of like animal spirits, and laughter. So again, thinking about the fairies that we're bringing in with our foliage, the spirits we're inviting in, the darknesses that can birth the light, the things that we see in the dark, those kinds of things come to light a little more for me here. Just some reflections. So finally, closing out with Christina Rossetti and Gustav Holst, because why wouldn't you? Again, I'm not gonna sing this, but I'm gonna recite it unto you. And I hope it closes out an opportunity here with me and with yourselves to reflect on what the solstice can mean for you, whether that's baking more, or putting nutmeg in more things, or hanging holly, or not hanging holly until a certain point and then taking it down at a certain point, or baking saffron cakes, or finding any number of other observations that you do at this time of year, which is something else that I wanted to include reflection on family traditions, on things that you do at this time of year that you would like to keep doing, and to remind you that there's always room to make new ones, and to build new ornaments, and to build more things to ornament as well. So I leave you with this bleakness so that we can exorcise it a little bit as well, so that it may be the ghost of loneliness that may haunt outside and be told to jog on by all the warmth and the laughter and familiarity of the gathering in the dark around the fire. In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan, earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow on snow, in the bleak midwinter, long, long ago. Angels and archangels may have traveled there. Cherubim and seraphim thronged the air, but only his mother, in her maiden bliss, worshipped the beloved with a kiss. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would give a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. But what can I give him? Give him my heart. Give him my heart. And so I hope that has been an opportunity at least to briefly reflect on some things that might be important to you, whether that's telling ghost stories, or making delicious saffron buns, or thinking about the birds or the flora and fauna of your region, of thinking about the traditions you love at this time of year, of thinking about the traditions that you hate, that you're not going to do. That's also important in this time of reflection and drawing close and reminding ourselves what's important. And so I hope you get to stay warm. I hope you get to see some loved ones. We are not out of the woods in terms of the darks and dangers of the year in terms of plague and things. I pray you are safe and are surrounded by people who are also making wise and safe decisions. And I hope to see you in the new year at one of these things or at something else. I pray you a blessed, powerful, peaceful, protected, and if you like, holy winter solstice. Happy midwinter, everyone. Take care.